Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Scarborough, October 12th, 2023 meeting of the Ordinance Committee. I'll call this meeting to order with roll call. April Seither.
Here.
Jean Marie Caterina is unfortunately unable to attend today, and we have Nick McGee's here. We do have quorum. Next is the approval of the minutes from the September 12th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Show that is unanimous. Thank you. Consideration of clarifying language to Chapter 601 Traffic Ordinance. And I believe this is going to start with Chief.
Well, I can
Or
start.
Andy.
Jump in or correct me. So Chapter 601 is our traffic control ordinance. And as we started looking at this, obviously Chief Holmquist being newer staff looking at it too, we're finding a lot of language that may be a little confusing or complicated that doesn't really need to be. So part of an ongoing task will be trying to clean this up. And because it is such a kind of daunting task, we're kind of looking at it little bite-sized pieces. And so the two changes we're going to talk to you this afternoon about really are not intended to have any change in the intent of the ordinance. It's just clarifying language. And there are two specific things we're going to talk to you about. The first one being in the no parking or parking restrictions section. The language on the left is the existing language related to Pine Point area, East Grand Ave. We meet periodically as a traffic safety group, myself, Chief Holmquist, and Doug Howard, the Public Works Director, to kind of look at some of these issues when it comes to stop signs, one-ways, crosswalks, speed limits, postings, things like that. So Chief Holmquist brought this one up in particular. So I don't know if you want to speak at all to this and any kind of complications that arose from this language.
Came up from a citizen who lives on East Grand Ave about a parking issue, a signage issue that was a vehicle that was parked in an area that it wasn't safe to park the vehicle, and the signage wasn't appropriate for the time of year. It's posted May 1st through September 15th. I believe the parking took place on the 17th or 18th, and there was some question regarding the current language in the ordinance. So I brought this to my experts. Lieutenant Vaughn and Sergeant Flynn happened to be in the office at the time, and I showed them what the concern was. And between the two of them, there was confusion and as far as perception of how the ordinance read. So I drove down to East Grand and I took a look and tried to make heads or tails out of the language and the signage that I could see down there. And so I brought it to the attention of our traffic safety committee that the language just seemed to be confusing. So we decided to come forward with these proposed changes.
So as you can see, the language being the westerly side of East Grand Ave at a certain address, which actually the road travels east-west. So it's difficult to even getting our bearings, right? So we were looking at it and simplifying it to go to the nearest street, which is Granite. Okay. So again, the intent is for no change. Essentially, it's just the language to clarify where that mark is, because Granite Street is on the ocean side of East Grand Ave, and it is intended to go from the Old Orchard Beach line to that area. And again, this is for seasonal. Was it May 15th to September 15th?
I believe it was May 1st, but
May 1st.
May 1st to September 15th. Yeah, that's correct.
So yeah, and the next one just kind of slide. It's really rough. Shows a aerial kind of thing. It's just basically that side, all that side of East Grand Ave, which is the intent. It's what is essentially posted now. It would continue to be there. It would just allow PD to be able to enforce it accurately. and it should be noted too that basically the ordinance speaks to that there is no parking in town unless designated. So beyond Granite is also signed as no parking anytime. So this is the seasonal section that I'm showing in red. Beyond that is no parking anytime, all year round, because that gets closer to the Pine Point intersection. So that's the first one. The next one is, you'll see a few pages that are just redlined. A section, essentially we have a section in our ordinance called speed limits in certain areas. And I would say that's accurate because it doesn't cover all the areas. It's kind of piecemealed, but what we're finding recently is when we start listing each road with a speed limit in it, which we're not required to do, in the ordinance, we don't have the authority to actually set, change, or create speed limits. It's an action of the Maine Department of Transportation and the approval of the chief of the state police. So we're essentially setting ourselves up for failure because what we have found recently, we just recently found that we had posted a speed limit that DOT had actually set differently. So we're getting errors. We're getting omissions where it's just not even either in our ordinance, but DOT set a different speed limit or vice versa. DOT never set a speed limit, but we somehow along the last 4 decades set it with, and so it's not justified. So it's not enforceable. So the solution we discussed again between police, engineering and public works was looking at it back to the actual jurisdiction and changing the language to just refer back to DOT being the governing agency that is allowed to set those. And this is an excerpt from DOT. I've also been in communication with our director of Maine Local Roads through DOT, who had a few edits. So I think the language you'll see up there, they essentially changed Roman numeral 2 slightly. That was their recommendation because they're saying it's actually in state statute. So we've had other rounds of review, I guess I just want to point out. So what we would like to probably move forward with if once we have approval through this body and it goes to council is to have the language you're seeing up on the screen rather than necessarily in your packet. It's just a minor change, but I just wanted to incorporate their thoughts and comments. And we're happy to answer any questions you have.
All right. Actually, before we get into questions, we'll open this up for public comment. Is there anyone online? I'm going to close public comment. Thank you for the presentation. I guess the only thing that, it looks like you've simplified it quite a bit based on what's coming out of there. The number 2, you said that's coming out of DOT, that Roman numeral 2.
Well, both sections is language from DOT and their guidance regarding speed limits.
Okay, so something like, I'm just grabbing a first example. I see Pleasant Hill area, right? Maximum speed limit is 35. That would end up falling under the category of 45 miles an hour on all the public ways unless otherwise posted. Because you don't have there's no 35 mile an hour category anywhere from the DOT language, right?
Well,
15,
only
25,
if,
45.
so the catch-all in Roman numerals, so just to clarify, is if DOT has not done a speed study.
Okay.
So anywhere you see like 30 and 35, DOT probably set that. And so there is an engineering analysis associated with it. That's what justifies how they set the speed limit. So to your point, Pleasant Hill, the ones listed actually are from DOT.
Okay.
So that's where we are actually, that is accurate. Our ordinance was accurate, but at any time if DOT changes that, our ordinance is not accurate.
It's not accurate. I got it. Okay. That makes sense.
Yep.
Do you have some questions?
I don't. I don't. No. I'm glad to see that, anytime we take out any kind of specifics that need to be changed every time something changes in town that then affects an ordinance, like obviously, it's much cleaner to have done it this way and just apply these general categories. So to your point, it does get a little confusing to try and match them up and go back.
Mhm.
But if these 3 bullet points cover what isn't posted or hasn't had a speed study done,
Yes.
and that's something that's enforceable, then that makes perfect sense to me. So I'm onboarding.
Just for further clarification to Councilor McGee's question, Liam, I wonder, are you able to actually connect on the link and show what is on the DOT site?
Oh, that map viewer link.
I don't know if it's hyperlinked. Simple point being is that undoubtedly there are dozens and dozens of scores of roads in Scarborough that actually have a speed limit that's available through this website, other than one of these default positions. Just as aside from the ordinance, I think the one thing we need to do as a follow-up is to make sure that what we have posted in the field is consistent with all of the above as well.
And then as an example, reason why the speed limit piece came up, I think, was recently, we had requested a speed study to be done on Dresser Road. And so that speed limit got set by DOT. They did that analysis, and we were about to add that into this section and saying, that's when we were finding some errors, emissions, and things like that, that we're like, okay, if we touch it, do we edit it? And then, to your point, we're continually updating it, and there's a lot of opportunities for errors.
Makes sense.
And essentially, it's a GIS map that as soon as they do the speed study analysis, it goes into their database. So they actually can print out, they sent me a spreadsheet of every road in town with speed limits. It also goes on this web page. That's what Liam was trying to find. That is just a GIS map that you can click on any road in town and get the speed limit posted by DOT or set by DOT.
It came up the other night, this is tangentially related. It came up the other night that we had a road that does not have any speed limit signs posted on it. Who is responsible for, like, why would we have roads in Scarborough that don't have a speed limit sign
So,
anywhere to be found?
Actually, they gave me, DOT gave me a guidance kind of document that talked about that 25-45, that's those bullets. And I'm sure Chief can speak to this better than I, but essentially, if it's not posted, it means there hasn't been a speed study, so we kind of fall into that window.
Right.
And go ahead.
They're outside of Scarborough. This is a common practice in some rural towns. It'll be an unposted, either 25 or 45 mile per hour zone. And our police officers are trained to act accordingly on roads that aren't posted. But certainly if you see a road that's posted, say a 30, where likely it was an unposted 45 in years past, and now it's posted as a 30, that means that road has been looked at by DOT. The engineering has been factored into that estimate of the speed limit. That way it eliminates the liability of the town to fall back onto DOT and what their studies reflected.
What triggers a speed study?
Sometimes just an email or a phone call
Okay.
requesting either, I get a lot of them directly, Angela does, Doug, Howard does occasionally, and sometimes our lieutenants do as well. So just from concerned citizens who can show that there's a problem in their neighborhood, whether it's a 25 zone or a 45 zone. If they have a warranted complaint, we'll do a speed study just to see if what in fact they're telling us is true, and if there's any need to adjust the speed limit, or a lot of times it's an enforcement issue that we just need to get our resources out in the field and conduct some enforcement.
Yeah, so we try to do some due diligence locally before we go to DOT, because the last speed study we did, it was a 2-year process. They're so backlogged that we really have to prioritize when we start looking at doing speed studies, and like I said, Dresser Road was one that really DOT would look for the town to make that request. And so that's why it's helpful to have kind of locally, we kind of vet it before it gets to DOT. And then
I would add, more often than not, the request comes from someone looking to have it lowered. And we try to be very careful about which ones we send, because we've seen the occasion where speed study's done and actually it either warrants the existing or sometimes a higher limit than it already is posted. And it's worth just perhaps mentioning how this works. So the speed study actually is over several days period or extended duration, actually clocks and records the traveling public, the speeds of the traveling public. And I believe the limit's set at the 85th percentile. And so the theory is the traveling public will dictate what a safe speed is, statistically.
Yeah, and I think, and DOT did provide some other guidance documents that I think is helpful, maybe to get out and educate the public a little bit to that point. I know it's hard to kind of connect those dots to say, really, you're going to set it based on the majority of the trips, but what they have found nationwide is you look at traffic studies, it actually is higher crash ratings when you arbitrarily set the speed limits to a lower rate. Because people are traveling fast and you come across someone going slow, it's an accident waiting to happen. And so that's what they're finding is it's actually a safer corridor if you set it based on what's comfortable. So what I tell a lot of residents is really, rather than just putting every road in town at 25 miles an hour, because that's usually we get requests for 25, is to start looking at ways to do traffic calming. So we start talking about curbing, bump outs, the street trees, and feeling like you're in a more kind of condensed space. And we've done a lot with even striping the road. If you're have a big wide open road, like on say Hygist, you're going to move faster than if you're on a little road and you have 10 feet wide to maneuver in. You kind of just arbitrary, you just go slower. So those are the kind of things I try to help people through, trying to figure out ways we can get people to want to go slower. I guess
a good example of that. Think about traveling south on Route 1 across the marsh into Dunstan, and then pretty much at Pine Point Road, Broad Turn Road, you'll notice the road with curb line. It's the same travel width, but it feels much more, and undoubtedly, you're probably 10 miles an hour slower just because of that feeling.
That's
so
a really good
it works.
example. Yeah, I can think exactly where that is. I was surprised to see the speed limit on Pine Point Road reduced from 45 to 35. I'm sure many residents were. I'm grateful for it. And obviously
well, again, that
the
was an
Audubon
error.
Center sits right there and there's a crosswalk. And so, there's.
That was the other one that we were about to come in with, is that our ordinance was incorrect.
Yep.
And DOT had that set at 45. We've just been posting it at 45. So that was one of those things that it was just wasn't it. I got an email actually from DOT Region 1 saying that's wrong.
That's wrong.
Someone identify it to them. Yeah.
So what is the correct speed limit?
Through Pine Point,
Yeah,
35.
It is 35. Okay.
Yeah.
Which feels more appropriate, given, like you said, that crosswalk.
Yeah.
In the school
The
there.
crosswalk.
Yeah.
Although my muscle memory, having to remind myself that is now 35.
Muscle memory with the right foot.
I mean, like driving around, I know exactly where to take my foot off the gas, going across the marsh, going up the hill towards Dunstan to go from 55 on the marsh to 35 at the top of that hill, right? I know exactly where. Muscle memory tells me where to take my foot off the gas. So if you go and change all the speed limit signs, I'm in big trouble.
Did you say 55, ma'am, on
I never go 55.
Okay, just check.
Ma'am, do you have any idea why we stopped you?
All right, we good on this?
Yes.
So the next steps for this would be to send it through to council in its current form, unless you have any amendments you'd like to offer.
Nope, I'm good.
No? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to send this to council as presented.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? So that is unanimous. Thank you both. Appreciate it. All right, next on our meeting this afternoon is item 6, receive a presentation from Efficiency Maine concerning commercial property assess clean energy program, C-PACE, and provide input to the Sustainability Committee. Special guest is,
Yes. Yep, so we've got James Neal from Efficiency Maine joining us, who's going to give a brief overview of the C-PACE program. And just to set the stage a bit, this C-PACE, well, PACE it stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a program that has been around for a while for residents to basically benefit from some financing to do energy efficiency projects. The state legislature just recently passed legislation to open up the opportunity to commercial developers and commercial landowners. And in order for them to take advantage, municipalities need to pass an ordinance to establish a C-PACE program in their town. So James is going to give a little bit of an overview of that program and what the requirements are for the town. And I do just want to add that Scarborough has had a PACE ordinance for residents since October of 2010. So this isn't necessarily a new concept for this town, but opening it up to the commercial property owners is.
thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Neal?
Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me. My name is James Neal. I'm the Senior Program Manager of Finance Initiatives for Efficiency Maine. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Let me know if you're catching anything other than intended. Is that showing
You
up?
have it.
Looks
We are
great.
good. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm battling the most recent version of COVID, so bear with my voice a little bit here. But this should be a pretty quick presentation, and I usually like to leave a little bit of time open at the end for questions because it is a relatively broad stroke program, and there's a lot of different stakeholders involved, so questions can come from a number of different sources. Really quickly about Efficiency Maine, I believe that most should be familiar with Efficiency Maine at this point, but never want to take that assumption for granted. Efficiency Maine is a quasi-state agency. We administer a lot of statewide energy efficiency and carbon savings programs. We provide different rebates, financing, technical information, and we're funded by a number of different sources. And we have a board that is appointed by the governor, confirmed by the legislature. The Efficiency Maine Green Bank is a subset of Efficiency Maine, not in any way a separate organization or a subsidiary, but really just an umbrella to hold all of our different finance initiatives, C-PACE being one of those. And the intent of the Efficiency Maine Green Bank is to build a bridge between customers and energy efficiency measures. Obviously, we have a number of different rebate programs, residentially and commercially, and those are intended to do that as well, and also to make the different energy efficiency technologies more cost effective. But the Green Bank is designed to break down any remaining barriers for any type of customer pursuing energy efficiency measures. So C-PACE, being a subset of the Efficiency Maine Green Bank, is a relatively unique financial instrument, and it has a very subtle exchange of values. So the primary aspect of this is that the borrowed capital is securitized by a property tax assessment with associated lien on the subject property. So from a capital provider's point of view, that means that this is a very secure finance product. Their money is very well protected. So with that, they're able to provide longer term lengths and lower interest rates to borrowers. So borrowers are then able to pursue these energy efficiency upgrades. And then the municipality, by enabling this transaction, is able to further stimulate and incentivize economic development, but also to promote energy efficiency measures because the program C-PACE is specific to what is considered an energy savings improvement. So the security in the lien provides several compelling finance features, but really it strengthens the business case for investment in longer payback and deeper building retrofits beyond traditional financing. From a national perspective, C-PACE has been around for a little bit over 13 years. 14% of the projects are typically in what's considered new construction. I don't believe that statistic includes gut renovations or more than 55% rehab projects, but it's not a huge percentage of the market that is new construction. This is primarily a retrofit program. And over 55% of the projects are considered energy efficiency and aren't just specifically renewable energy, aka solar, where the initial onset of the CPACE programs were very heavily made up of solar projects. But you can see that there's a pretty wide adoption across the country of this CPACE program. The legislator, can you hear me okay over there?
James, I just wanted to appreciate the other New England states participating. Can you go back to that slide?
Sure. You have
Yeah, so you have to forgive my eyesight. Maybe if I turn around.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, we've got Massachusetts and Rhode Island are full participants already, and the rest are somewhere in the process. Is that correct?
And Connecticut.
Yeah.
as well.
Connecticut, I've heard.
Connecticut is one of the longest tenured programs, and Massachusetts has had a couple variations. Same thing with Maine. We've had the residential PACE program and now the commercial PACE program. And there's subtle differences between PACE enabled and an active program. PACE enabled can also mean that it's available for participation, but it might not necessarily be administered at the state level. So it might not have a formal active program process. It might be something that each municipality could pursue on their own. It depends on what the state legislature passed in those different respective areas.
Thank you.
Of course. Our particular legislation, we had our enabling legislation in 2021. We went through a solid year of vetting other programs and working with the various stakeholders of Maine to find out what we should include and not include in our program that was consistent with that enabling legislation. We went through our rulemaking process earlier in the year and have just over the last few months launched the capital provider registration process, the municipality participation process, and also now the project application process is live. So at this particular moment, the program is fully live. These are some great sources. If anybody has interest in further diagnosing CPACE and understanding it on more of a national level, feel free to take a look at any of these different sources. I think Lessons in Commercial PACE Leadership, the Path from Legislation to Launch, was one of the most insightful for myself. Our design objectives were pretty simple. We wanted to preserve a pretty low administrative burden of the program for municipalities while maintaining the quality assurance process and making sure that all of the criteria of the enabling legislation was being met, as well as of the rule and our program guidelines, which are the subsequent documents to that enabling legislation. We feel we've struck a pretty good process, making it relatively simple for municipalities, and I'll get a little bit more into that. The first thing that a municipality would need to know is that there's two options for participating in the CPACE program. One is to administer your own program. You could adopt a CPACE ordinance and essentially design your own program, register your own capital providers, and adjust your program guidelines as long as it adhered to both the rule and the enabling legislation. Then you could fully run your own program. The other option would be to, in addition to adopting a CPACE ordinance, to sign a municipality participation agreement and enter into the program administered by the trust, which is Efficiency Maine. No municipality that has adopted the program thus far or considered the program thus far has decided to pursue their own program. They've all been interested and pursued participating in efficiency mains program. The downsides to adopting or administering your own program are likely twofold. One is that it increases the administrative burden significantly, but also that capital providers would be very unlikely to participate in such a program because they have to underwrite the program entirely just to pursue a project. So unless you had, an initial $20 million project sitting there for CPACE financing, it's very unlikely that a capital provider would review the entire program for the subtle differences it may have just to be able to facilitate projects in that particular area. So just a couple considerations. We did want to make that open and available as an opportunity, but none are pursuing that particular opportunity thus far. There are a few municipality-based programs across the country, and they're usually in like a New York City or an Atlanta. So obviously I'll leave it up to Scarborough to decide whether or not it's a fit for them, but I think it may make more sense to enter into the trusts program, but I want to maintain and preserve the integrity of just being an information source to the municipality rather than dictate a direction for you. A few key characteristics of CPACE financing is CPACE financing does take first position in a project or in a property for anything except for real property taxes or any form of municipal lien, municipal sewer, or sanitary water districts. So anything that isn't municipal level, CPACE does take first position. It is transferable. In the event of a property sale or foreclosure, CPACE can carry over, and it also survives a foreclosure. It's non-accelerating, so if there is a delinquency or it goes through a foreclosure process, only the arrears payments can be collected, and all of the future payments in future years are similar to that of future tax years. They can't be pulled forward. The financing can be paid off entirely, but it can't be accelerated in the instance of foreclosure or anything like that. There's two different default processes. If only the CPACE assessment is in default, then the CPACE assessment can essentially utilize the powers of the municipality exclusively on their own and not utilizing any municipal effort to reclaim any of the arrears payments. But if the municipality is also experiencing a delinquency or default, then it defaults to the process of the municipality, and the municipality gets to be made whole first. And then if the municipality was to collect any additional balances beyond making themselves whole, then they could remit them to the CPACE capital provider to make them current. A couple other details about the program. It must be an energy savings improvement, which we have a broad definition in our program guidelines for a commercial property located in a participating municipality. If the project is new construction, it must be considered above code. That is MUBEC standard code and does not include a stretch code. So if something meets stretch code, it can still be considered eligible for the program at the request of a number of municipalities through the design process. Any existing mortgage holder, lien, or encumbrance must consent to the CPACE financing. The finance terms are limited to the cost of the energy savings improvement and also to the term length equal to that of the weighted average useful life of the equipment that would be installed. Heat pumps have a unique characteristic where in the case of new construction, if they're utilizing heat pumps as their primary heating source, they can take either 14% of the building costs as the energy savings improvement cost. So they can finance 14% of the building or the line item heat pump cost. And there's a couple of reasons that we designed that in new constructions. CPACE typically takes the place of mezzanine debt, which is roughly 10 to 20% of the cost of a project and is typically a very expensive part of the capital stack. And so we wanted to make sure that those who are pursuing CPACE for new construction knew that they could have a percentage of the building covered as long as they were planning on building in the heat pumps and didn't have to wait till they got all those invoices back to line item the cost of what the heat pumps were. From an underwriting perspective, every project must have a savings to investment ratio, or SIR, of at least 1. So that means these projects are positive cash flow and are a strong financial decision. And also the CPACE assessment is capped at 35% of the value of the property. So you can't 100% finance a property with CPACE financing in any way, shape, or form. The savings to investment ratio document does need to be signed by a technical reviewer, which means a Maine state engineer. This is a very quick chart that shows that most of the stakeholders to the project do not need to be registered or in any way part of a program by definition, with the exception of the capital provider and the municipality. So the municipality must participate in the program and the capital provider must be registered for the program. But the improvement contractor does not need to be specifically tied to the program. So yes, Efficiency Maine has a qualified vendor list and a qualified partner list who is likely to administer these types of projects, or likely to provide the installation for these types of projects, but there's no specific opt-in of contractors for this program. I also want to just point you towards the municipality participation guide available on our web pages. This has kind of the simple breakdown for municipalities on what their responsibilities are throughout the program. This page shows a little bit more of the values of participating in the program, whereas our next page shows more of the categories of effort that would need to be taken place by a municipality throughout the program. So assuming the municipality had adopted the program and was fully participating, the municipality has very few responsibilities. One is they would have to execute a CPACE assessment agreement, which is available for review on our webpage. For each CPACE project, they would have to execute that agreement. The municipality, through that agreement, actually passes the power of agency to the capital provider to place the assessment and collect the payments. So there's very little ongoing process requirements for the municipality, with the exception of in a foreclosure, there are those slight deviations to the foreclosure process that I had mentioned, such as if the municipality collects more than they were due, that they would remit any of the excess that they collect to the capital provider for CPACE to make them current. The suggested documents to review are our CPACE program guidelines, the CPACE ordinance, the model CPACE ordinance that we have, the CPACE municipality participation agreement, and the CPACE assessment agreement, all that can be available at efficiencymaine.com/C-PACE. And I'm happy to stop there and take any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Neal. At this time, unless Jamie, do you have anything to add right now?
No, so the Sustainability Committee was just looking for the Ordinance Committee's feedback on if this is something that that you'd be interested in them pursuing, and then they'll bring forward a draft ordinance and the other documents that James mentioned in his presentation.
Right, thanks. I'll do the public comment thing real quick here. Is there anyone that is wishing to speak on this topic? Please approach the podium or raise your hand online. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment, turn it over to the committee for the time being. April, do you want first crack at this? Because I've got some questions too.
Sure. So mine is less questions and more just to give background. I'm also the liaison to the Sustainability Committee. So I've had the pleasure of hearing the presentation from Mr. Neal twice now. I also have, had a front row seat to the conversation that happened at Sustainability. And, Jamie opened and mentioned that we have a residential CPACE program within Scarborough and have had one for quite some time. And so this to me seems like a logical extension to at least have sustainability draft and ordinance for our consideration, it also ties into council goals of kind of having the committee-driven work be what comes before council. So I wanted to kind of tie that all together before we dive in.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I'm going to take you back to square one. So from what I gather, this is basically just a loan program for commercial businesses to improve energy efficiency within their buildings.
Yep. And there's really two different types of retrofit projects versus new construction projects are they can be quite different from how they're typically financed. And this is designed to be a tool that can be used for either.
And I understand that the memo that we have here says this will, increase our ability to encourage and be competitive. I'm not making the connection quite. Why is this loan different than a typical loan for upgrades anywhere else? How is this different? And why do we need an ordinance to authorize these loans?
The ordinance is there in case a municipality, it is intended to not be forced on municipalities to participate in there to come to their own conclusions and decide whether or not it makes sense for them. The reason that this is considered an improvement across compared to other types of financing, I'll answer that first in retrofit. For retrofit projects, if you own a commercial property and you are looking to switch to heat pumps or electrification or utilize a number of the efficiency main program incentives, or essentially if you're trying to make the needed upgrades for your building, either because you need them or because you're looking for that additional public benefit of lower carbon emissions and lowering of greenhouse gases, the typical type of financing that is available to you is a primary mortgage or some other lien on your property. And once you are not in the primary mortgage category anymore, you are looking at the second position in the property, the term lengths get shorter and the interest rates go up. So that typically makes the business case for a commercial property, it reduces its value, even though you are implementing a energy savings improvement, which will save you money in the long run. You're not experiencing that positive cash flow from day one. So it's just harder to make that decision. Right now is actually a great example of when this is more important because a lot of the businesses are on interest rates that they refinanced into from 3 years ago that are much lower, and they're not looking to refinance their entire property that might have a value of $1 million just to get, $50,000 or $100,000 of solar on their building. So it's just harder to access that other type of capital with long enough terms. So CPACE is a great tool for that. Yes, it does take first position and require mortgage lender consent, but it's a great tool for that. In the case of new construction, the bridge between what is typically invested into a property by the primary property holders and primary property owners is roughly 10 to 15%. And then the mortgage will typically take on about 65%. So there's a gap in there of, sometimes between 10 and 20% that you typically have to go to outside preferred investors, which take a very large margin because they're also the second position in the property. And have also a shorter term length, or you have to get mezzanine debt, which is more institutional preferred investors, and you experience something similar. So in some cases, we're providing property developers who have no interest in the energy savings improvement. We're encouraging them to pursue the energy savings improvements and build greener and more sustainable buildings because they get to use this tool. But in other instances, we're enabling their ability to pursue those types of energy savings improvements for their property because the financing that we're providing, and I shouldn't say financing, I should say financing mechanism that we're providing them gives them the ability to make that choice. But the best part of this is that you're stimulating economic development and energy savings improvements with $0 invested from the municipality or from the state. All we're doing is providing the mechanism.
Thanks. You go ahead. Do you have, okay. You're gonna forgive me as you walk me through the paces of this one. No pun intended. I think where I'm really struggling with this is I'm looking at language right now for a proposed sample ordinance that the program carries on its own website. And I'm just reading from it. And the collection of assessments, a commercial property owner participating in the commercial PACE program will repay the financing of energy savings improvements through an assessment on their property similar to a tax bill. Commercial PACE assessment constitutes a lien on the qualifying property until it's paid in full and must be assessed and collected by the city or town or its designated agent, the trust in this case, right? Or a third-party administrator contracted by the trust. So I think this is where I'm really, really struggling is I'm being asked to implement an ordinance that makes the municipality via the trust the collector of its bills. And I'm not making the connection how this is beneficial to the town. I'm just not. And if I'm behind the 8 ball here and somebody needs to get me up to speed, I appreciate it. But I don't see how this is encouraging energy efficiency anywhere across town. Maybe it makes financing more accessible, but even then, this is placing itself in a lien position superior to the contractor who would be installing the machinery, in the way it's known as mechanics lien. And that irritates me a little bit about this, is that you've now posted, and I'm not blaming you, sir, Mr. Neal. I know you didn't write the legislation, or maybe you did, but I'm sure you didn't. But and then I'm not trying to throw stones at you or your presentation here. It's just, it seems to me that we've built in a lending mechanism with the municipality acting as a collector of it, and then kind of superseding a bunch of other people who have been in line for other loans that might be in place. And I have a really hard time thinking that this is a quote unquote good ordinance for us. I've got to believe there are other programs out there that can encourage energy efficiency savings within our community, whether it's commercial or residential, without going down this path. And again, I'm perfectly happy to be set straight by somebody. I'm not sure it needs to be at this meeting, but I would appreciate it if we could send this out another meeting for me to digest further and maybe educate myself better about what the potential benefits of this could be. But I can tell you, I'm uneasy at this exact moment in time about doing anything more than asking for a delay.
And I think there's some important parts there, is that the ordinance, the municipality participation agreement, and the CPACE assessment agreements are all work in conjunction, which is why the municipality participation guide is helpful to draw the links there. But the initial element of CPACE was, and I say initial meaning 12 years ago when the first CPACE programs were coming out, is that the municipality placed the assessment and collected the payments with the tax bills and remitted them to the capital provider. This is more of a hybrid between a mortgage and that type of program, in that in the CPACE assessment agreement, the municipality is providing to its agent, which is the capital provider, who has to be registered to participate in the program, the authority to essentially collect their own payments. The municipality isn't executing any of that assessment or collection of payments. And also, any existing lien on the property, any existing lien or encumbrance has to give it's called a mortgage lender consent, but it's not specific to just mortgages. But any existing lien or encumbrance in the property has to consent to CPACE financing coming into place. So essentially, think of it as a very micro special assessment that the municipality doesn't have to worry about assessing or collecting. So it's essentially a private mortgage. It just slices in front of all of the existing mortgages, liens, or encumbrances with their permission is collected on its own, but has the reason it carries some of the characteristics of what is considered CPACE is that it survives foreclosures, is that it's transferable. So a number of those different elements are what make it a little bit more attractive. And once again, you can't access this financing without having pursued energy savings improvement that is above code, or for retrofit, it being for an energy savings improvement. It also has to have a savings to investment ratio. So it is not a unanimous solution, is not the only solution that's needed in the market. And in many cases, it's not the best solution, but there's a number of use cases that strongly suggest that CPACE further, incentivizes and helps put these different energy efficiency projects in and helps the energy efficiency of new construction come into place. So I'm happy to be a resource for you and help walk through those different elements, but it's definitely not a standalone solution. It's not a one size fits all. And also it's not typically used for very small projects. There are retrofit projects in that mid-sized bucket of $250,000 to $750,000, such as, switching over from furnaces to heat pumps in a reasonable sized commercial property, but it's typically for larger projects of $1, $2, $3 million. Think multifamily, new development of multifamily properties in which they're going to have heat pumps as the primary heating source and solar panels and all of these other different characteristics. So I both agree with a lot of your assessment, but I also think that it's certainly not a negative to the municipality in any way. And I think a number of the additional documents kind of simplify and take a lot of the burden to the municipality and risks to the municipality away, while still preserving the values that the program does have of stimulating the right type of project that can use this type of financing. And I'm happy to be a resource for more questions as you go. It sounds like you're hoping for more time to digest this.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Neal. I do have another follow-up question. Do we have anyone in town actively looking to maybe participate in a program like this that you're aware of?
So we did have someone join us at remotely for our sustainability committee meeting, asking about opportunities for low-income housing, like benefiting from this program. And the stipulation is, if it's a nonprofit group, if they're not paying property tax, they're not eligible to participate in this program. But I think it's so new that people probably don't know that it's a possibility, and until the town kind of adopts this program, it wouldn't be a possibility in Scarborough either. So I don't know, other than that one person that joined us for that meeting, if there is other interest in town.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Sure.
Do you have any questions?
I do not have any questions. I'll let you digest, because I have questions about where your concern is coming from. Just because from my perspective, this is an opportunity. It's pretty highly regulated. It's very specific to a certain type of project, seeking a very specific kind of financing that they may not be able to get to otherwise. And so I just want to make sure that, I understand the concerns. And this is a lot of information. So I appreciate that you want more than 15 minutes to think about it.
There's a lot here.
If this was the first time I was seeing this, I would definitely want more time. So.
And I think that was part of the approach to bring this presentation forward, introduce the concept, hear what questions you have. And if it's something that you're interested in, even just considering, the sustainability committee will get to work on it.
And I'll follow up with questions either offline or and just anything that's popping in my head regarding this. And hopefully you can help me and maybe work with Mr. Neal too as a conduit.
Sure.
Just to see. And I also don't know if Jean Marie, where she would be on this. We are missing her.
Yeah, it's a challenge to have just two.
Right.
Sure.
So
If it helps too, there's a number of other municipalities in a relatively similar stage. 3 have adopted it, and with another 4 or so imminently adopting it, and then another 10 behind that are in the consideration stages. So happy to be a resource and also connect to others who are in similar processes.
I do appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So anything else on this topic? I'll close it and move on to the next.
Thank you, James.
Yep, thank you,
Yeah,
James.
thank you, Mr. Neal. Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Oh, and Miss Autumn, here we go. Because I wanted 800 pages of landscaping information to read.
Some pretty colors. Okay, great. Thank you.
Item number 8 is discussion and possible action on proposed amendments to chapter 405B site plan review ordinance, section F, landscape and screening standards. Autumn.
Alrighty. So I'll just start this off by saying I have no intention of getting through this entire thing in one ordinance meeting. So just gonna put that out there. This is a lot. So this is part of our ordinance consolidation efforts, and you all saw the lighting ordinance first, and this is part 2. This is landscaping and screening. This is more. There's a bit more to it. There's some ordinance changes that are required for zoning districts, outdoor storage, and things like that. So what I had planned on doing is just going through the color version with you all, kind of page by page, and answering questions and telling you where some of the information came from and how we got to it and the process that we took. So let me share my screen. My laptop's being a little strange today, so. Okay, there we go. Alrighty. So this again is the intro, and this is where we've been with this so far. So the Conservation Commission made a recommendation to our plant list back in April, and that was sort of the first part of this. And then Long Range Planning Committee spent June, July, and August with it. And then in September, they were finally satisfied with moving it forward to you all. So that's where we've been. And the first thing we did is take a look at our purpose. We clarified applicability, general standards, and we added definitions. And so if you have followed along in the color version, the purple text comes from our existing chapter 405B site plan, and then random places in our zoning ordinance. And then the blue is from the commercial design standards, the really big book that we have online. And then green is proposed. And then there are a few changes that I have added since our last long range planning committee meeting, just some other cleanups as I go through and see what it's going to do to other ordinances and some questions I've received from other folks. So those are always highlighted in yellow. So that's basically how it looks. But for the purpose, that purpose statement was taken from existing language. The applicability has been cleaned up to add that replacement and new landscaping, it all has to comply. This doesn't apply to single family homes. So that's important to understand. And then the definitions really have to do with just adding some clarity about what types of plants are and kind of some terms that are used. So this is where you get into the minimum landscaping required, sort of where it begins on page 2. And so this is the first part. So this is your minimum. You take a lot, 10,000 square foot lot, and you have a certain percentage overall that you're trying to achieve. And all of the other components that follow build into that. So this is the bare minimum that you'll have to have, and it's based on a percentage of land that's on your property, and then trees and shrubs per square footage. So that's your minimum. And then say you have to do parking screening or dumpster screening, all those things roll up into that. So this is your basic beginning standards. Then you get into streetscape buffer yards. And this part is really, in all these zoning districts, we have specific streets that are acknowledged. For instance, in the B2 district, it talks about Payne Road, Gorham Road, streetscape buffers that are required. And so instead of it being all over the place in different zoning districts, we combined it into this one. So these all exist right now. But what we have added was the requirements for what goes in those. So we've added within the required buffer yard, large trees shall be planted at a rate of 1 per 30 feet. And they can be on center, they can be irregular groupings. There's a little bit of flexibility, but that's what we've added to that. Most of our ordinances now say street trees are required on both sides of the road, but there's no requirement for how many or spacing or any sort of type. So then we get into residential adjacency. This one is interesting too, because our zoning districts, a lot of them require residential adjacency. We're having this discussion with the zoning district right now, but we have this in others. And so there might be 50 feet required or 100 feet required if you are a non-residential use up against a residential district. But this is a basic standard that also applies if it's multifamily or if it's multifamily to single family. So it falls back on the zoning ordinance requirements, but it also adds this extra buffer, if you will, for different uses. So that's what's proposed with that. And then parking lot landscaping. Parking lot landscaping is a bit of a challenge, I'd say, right now at planning board, because we usually have a 10 to 15% parking lot landscaping required. And we don't have any really good idea of where parking lot landscaping begins or ends. It's usually just sort of this imaginary line. And that's just what it says. And so there's a lot of arbitrariness about that. So this is a really prescriptive approach. So we may end up somewhere in the middle, but this one really talks about how many trees and shrubs you need for parking lot. The long range planning committee was really wanted to make sure that we had breakups between long swaths of parking spaces in a row. And so those types of things are included in this part. Then we get into foundation planting. Again, we had some requirements for foundation plantings, and this is around the building in our previous iterations of this, but we didn't define what those were. So I think you can see around town, we have some really good examples of foundation plantings and some really poor examples in execution. So this gives a more clear requirement for what is required for foundation plantings. And then screening, we combine screening that's mechanical screening and service screening, and then outdoor storage, combined it all into the landscape section. There are some, as you consider this and think about it, there are some light industrial and industrial zoning districts that we probably, well, I don't think probably, we do need to consider if screening and things of that nature are required. So right now, the light industrial and the industrial districts, the parking lot landscaping applies because it's in the parking lot ordinance. If it's a planned development, some of the site plan requirements apply. And screening could be just a fence. So it's really loose. I'd rather make it all very clear. These do not apply to properties zoned light industrial, or they do. So we know when we get that question. That's something, the more I read an ordinance, usually the more I'm like, okay, is this going to work for this? And this one's going to be one that requires 15 amendments, sort of like we had to all of our zoning districts. So pulling out all the small pieces. So that's just something I'd like you to think about. What level of landscaping requirements should apply to light industrial and industrial property? And also remembering where our light industrial is, because it's in a part of town that's next to single family. So then we have preservation and protection on page 8, and it's nothing really outrageous. It's just really saying if you're going to propose preservation, or then you have to put in some protection measures. So sometimes we get site plan applications that propose to preserve a tree stand or something of that nature to count towards their landscaping, but we don't have any requirements on what that means. So there's some really specific industry standards, and so that's what we've added for that. So. And then we get into site amenities and bicycle facilities. We have a couple of zoning districts on their own that include bicycle facilities, and then we have site amenities like benches and that sort of thing, and bicycle facilities in the commercial design standards. So it's really trying to put it all into one location. This is something the Long Range Planning Committee felt very adamant about, making sure that we have bicycle parking facilities with every commercial use. And so there's a rate of 1 for every 10 spaces required. And then there's some standards, and then the location. And this was a good question that came up from a developer. Could we have indoor bicycle facilities, say for a multifamily project, especially with our climate? And that would be perfectly fine with the way we have it written now, because the planning board can look at those locations. So there's a little bit of flexibility in that, but the number is pretty set for this one. We get snow storage. Who knew? I know so much more about snow storage than I ever thought imaginable. The first time I saw it on a plan, I'm like, what is snow storage? Oh, right.
And we look for it too.
No, so now we really are, particular about it. And so we've written requirements for snow storage, and then if you have alternative plans, how you need to address that. And it's all just part of site plan cleanup, I think. And then we get into the plant species list on page 10. This one, we took what the Conservation Commission recommended and then really built on that and expanded it to include all of our native trees. I did change it a bit and remove some things and added quite a few things, and made some references to some resources. The perennial, this is probably more in the weeds than you'll ever want to know, but there's way too many native perennials and ferns and shrubs and whatnot to list them all. So there are some resources and some flexibility to add those if they're not on the list, that's okay through the site plan process.
I believe at one point too, there were some invasive species listed in our ordinance.
Our current, as approved, has some invasive species, yes.
Correct. So those have been removed.
I was gonna say.
Not yet, no.
Proposed
no.
to be removed.
They're being proposed and we don't let people use them.
Got it. Okay.
Sort of the plant hammer right now. So no, we're actively using this list in our reviews, much like we were actively using our lighting standards. So that's really proposes to clean that up. And then took a look at modernizing the size for plants that are required. And so that's included. And then finally, we have installation guarantee and maintenance. So we had quite a bit, but we did add something, and we have this constantly. And this has been something we're trying to figure out how to deal with from a planning perspective is, so you get your site plan approved in June, you build your building, you get your CO in November, and you put up a performance guarantee for plants. And you may never plant those plants. You may forget about it, or your performance guarantee is not that meaningful. We don't have a time frame right now, so you can just let it sit, and technically you're still good to go. And I have someone right now that's the example. It's not worth it to them to get their performance guarantee to do the plants that are required, and that's just an awkward situation to be stuck in. So this gives us a time frame. So from your CO, you have 6 months, and then you are in clear, distinct violation. And I don't really know how much harder it's going to get for you, but that's what was proposed.
You're gonna have to forgive me for asking questions during your presentation,
Go for
but
it.
this is pretty meaty, and while something pops in, I don't want to lose sight of it. I did notice that there's a guarantee in here. It says all lawns and plant material shall be guaranteed for a period of not less than 2 years.
Mhm.
I know 1 year is pretty common in the industry, at least from my working experience. Is 2 years? Do you know if landscapers are going to be willing to guarantee these for up to 2 years, or even, I mean, I guess, are you asking the developer to guarantee it for 2 years?
The developer should, and they should have their landscaper guarantee it, if not, right? And this is actually in our ordinance now. We just don't always,
That's gonna be awesome.
We
So
don't
my
always-
follow-up question, which is,
we don't always track things.
do we want to track things though, Autumn? Do you want to know how many ferns went in over and, behind the Holy Donut and check on it in 5 years?
Not
Yes.
really, but we have to, right? So I mean, so if there's,
Have to.
well, but we do. So if your site plan required you to do, and it's funny, we're getting into this 30-year development cycle. I've had 4 or 5 people now ask, our trees are dying, what do we do?
Areas when I see stuff, it's not necessarily in a commercial property. Sometimes they're common areas on residential properties.
Well, this wouldn't apply to residential property unless it was done through their subdivision plan.
Right.
And we are not in a place to enforce, if you buy a home and your builder planted 2 trees, we don't enforce that.
Sure.
I'm not gonna even remotely know if there were street trees that were required in our right of way and those died, then those need to be replaced. We've had that same issue where the homeowners maybe didn't want them back.
Yeah.
They're required and they were part of the subdivision and it's our town right away. But for commercial, what we've done in the past, and we've done it a few times, is it's pretty much a request that comes into the planning office and says, we want to take down these 7 dead pine trees or overgrown pine trees. We'd like to replace them with these fir trees. And then we do a minor amendment and put it in the file and say, you're good to go. Or if the one that I'm recently thinking of, they wanted to cut the trees down in the winter, but they didn't want to plant until the spring. And because I'm leery and don't trust anyone, I said, that's fine, but we need a performance guarantee. And so suddenly they found the trees and they're planted now. So we didn't have to deal with that, but that's another way we've handled it. We don't make them go to the planning board and do a huge, expensive thing. But there could definitely be something maybe put in for easier things. Because I think as long as you're following the perennial, you can't replace a tree with a shrub.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, but as long as you're
divide
alike-
it categorically.
Yeah, as long as you're in the
So
same
to your
category.
point, like, ferns and rose bushes, like, if we define that categorically, they should just be able to look in the list and be like, okay, this is a, this is
Yes.
this is a category purple, plant, and all these would qualify as a
right.
replacement for that plant.
Yeah, and it's just really an ask. And do we catch them all and does everyone ask? No.
Right.
No. But the thing is, you have so many things here that are in existence that if we didn't have, so if you planted something today and you planted 10 trees and it's a lovely site and in 5 years, you rip it all up and you stick a dumpster out there, you're not in compliance anymore. And so we have to notice it. And so most cities and towns that I'm familiar with and worked with are more complaint-based. But some are proactive. But there's a really, a move right now to make sure that communities have the right tree canopy. And so it's really important for climate and lifestyles and just amenities for communities. So I think it's important to keep up with it. And we're gonna get new software too, so maybe there'll be some things that'll help.
Is 6 months,
Easier.
so you had mentioned, Autumn, that people who get their occupancy permits have 6 months. Is that enough time in New England? If I get my occupancy permit in October, sometimes April is not the ideal time to plant something.
You should plant in October. No, I started.
Noted.
No, sorry. Sorry, that was sassy, but we started with 8 months, and that's the exact conversation we had at Long Range, was, okay, so in November and 6 months, it was kind of the math. It's 6 months. And if,
Planting season starts in June here, right?
yeah, I just don't think that's that late, but yeah, that's the conversation we had.
I'm
So
sure.
if council wanted to, I think 8 months is okay as well. It's just really, we have this issue that we respond to monthly, when is this going to be planted? Because the condition of approval doesn't have any sort of timing for landscaping.
I totally support putting a
Yeah,
time
yeah.
constraint on it. And I completely understand how that would make your life and your job significantly easier to define, if nothing else. I just want to make sure we have the right number on there.
Right.
I would, and please forgive me if I missed it. You can put the time frame in there, but couldn't we also create some sort of administrative extension? Where
Sure.
circumstances, you look at it and say, yeah, he needs like 3 more months. And we'll note in the file, if we put some, I would prefer that. I mean, the hard and fast is
As long as
nice.
we have the performance guarantee in place, we can usually work with people.
Food for
It becomes a matter of staff time. I've been working with people since July that had a site plan that expired on July 18th, and it's October now, and I'm still on a weekly basis getting complaints. And hey, when are you gonna do this? When are you gonna do this? And it's because it was approved without a deadline for compliance or a performance guarantee. And so really, it's just how much harassment can you deal with from the planning staff and how much time do we have? So I don't want to put us into a position to have to do that a lot. But we are really, my staff is really reasonable with working with people and really usually very accommodating. And I don't intend to change that in any way, but if we need to, I'd like to have the rules in place so we can.
So, and then, forgive me if I should know this, what is the penalty for not being in compliance?
Usually, we give you 7 days to comply, and then it's a fine per day, $100, $150 per day, and, so then we get into, this is my favorite part of the ordinance. This is a blank form that's part of the ordinance, and it's submitter of site plan, fill this out, and half of our review is done, right? Because you filled it out in a way that's easy to decipher, and we can check it, we count your trees, and we count your shrubs, and we're good to go. And so it makes it really easy for review for staff and planning board. So that's that part. And then finally, we have waivers. So our waivers aren't specifically defined right now. It's sort of loosey-goosey what you can ask for in the site plan process from planning board. So the long-range planning committee really wanted to make sure these were very defined. Like, you can ask for a waiver, but this, in this situation. So as you read through those, there's definitely some opportunity to expand on these. Some of these may be, it's been suggested that some of them be put into the rules instead of a waiver. So it's just, if you have this scenario, this is okay kind of thing. But that's what we have right now. And that is all I have.
Okay. Thank you. This is an opportunity for public comment. If you are here in attendance or online and would like to speak, please raise your hand. I am going to close public comment. All right. April, would you like to take any further questions on what we're seeing? I'm wondering if we should actually chop this up somewhat.
Yeah, how do you want to approach this? I don't have any further questions for Autumn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done.
So how do you procedurally want to approach this?
This has been through long range,
Yes.
and this has been through
Conservation Commission.
Conservation.
Conservation just looked at the plant list.
Okay. I would trust them more than I would me. For anyone that might remember Susan Ogles, I wish she was reviewing this because she was the landscaping lady on the planning board. She was the best. She knew it all.
Conservation has some experts too. I bet they,
I'm not knocking them. I'm just
Oh,
saying
no,
Susan
I'm
was
just
awesome, all
saying.
right?
just saying.
Okay, we're just saying things. All right, so how do we want to digest this? I'm going to ask the person who wrote it, how would you digested this once, right? So how would you go about this? Would you literally take this by we should consider it by parking lot, we should consider it by plant material, we should consider it by buffering. Like, how would you, seeing as you had to do this, piecemeal it,
Right.
what worked?
You could do it that way. You could take a look at, the part that I would spend the most time on, maybe, how about that?
Sure.
Would be the minimum landscaping required. And then I would spend the most time really looking at the residential adjacency component and then the parking lot.
Okay.
I think, and maybe foundation planting, because there may be some opportunities for some flexibility. Because right now it's very, like foundation planting, for instance, around your whole building is a 5-foot separation, a 5-foot walkway, and 1 shrub every 4 feet around your whole building. So you may want to take a look at that to offer up some flexibility in some different scenarios. You know, that's, and then for the parking lot, you may want to make some consideration for snow plowing for larger parking lots. Right now, there's 1 island required, so every 10, it's a rate of 1 per 15, so overall. But then there's an island required every 10 spaces, a separation. So, and you could do 1 island could count for 3 different locations if properly located. So if it's on the end and it's in a driveway, it can do a couple of different things. But you might want to take a look at that and see what that really means. Screening is pretty clear. Snow storage, I think. Site amenities, the plant species list. You may want to take a look at the percentages. The percentages proposed, all of the trees are required to be on this list. I feel really good about that. This is a good list of trees. You may want to, so the way it's written now, on page 10, is that when the ordinance requires a shrub, only plants classified as flowering and ornamental shrubs, perennial ferns and grasses may be used. So that's good. That gets back to that one, you know, like for like. A minimum of 60% of all of those required shrubs shall be selected from the preferred species list, so on this. And then another 25% of shrubs may be selected from an unlisted species subject to site plan approval. And then I've included some sources to go to for extra plants. This was a good compromise, I think, from the Long Range Planning Committee, from 100% natives, and we only have this list. But my issue was the list was not it was not complete. There's so many plants, especially in that category. So they decided that this was a good way to look at it. So I think if you're comfortable with it, and I'm pretty comfortable with it, that's all set. Just making sure you understand what that means, really.
So here's where my head's at right now, because we are not going to have a November ordinance committee, and the composition of this may change.
Gonna change.
May. You never know. Why don't, and I propose we do it with the pace. I think we do our reviews offline with questions, and we leave little Post-it notes for the next committee on questions that either, or suggestions for that last topic and for this one. And hopefully we don't have much of a delay in some of this implementation. If we can try to make it, you don't have to do this whole presentation again for a new committee. Hopefully we can leave this in a spot where it can be picked up and advanced next time around.
Okay.
Does that seem?
Like January?
Yeah, I think that's probably where we would end up, don't you? I mean, most likely.
Yeah, being realistic about when committees are reassigned and everyone kind of reconvenes, it could be January.
Yeah. And there's other topics that this committee had in the queue that are going to need to be brought forward too.
The ordinance committee? Yeah.
So that's what I would propose we do with this, which is why don't we leave our notes for the next round of counselors? Maybe it's ourselves. and then share them with Autumn too for feedback and maybe follow-up, because it might need to go back to long range or something. Yes, Liam?
What is the urgency, in your opinion, to bring these changes forward?
I think I'm getting quite a bit of desire from the planning board to have this and the plant species list, but as long as I'm continuing to make recommendations that they follow this, that the planning board is making as part of their requirements.
I mean, we could update the plant list pretty easily.
We're okay.
But the rest of it probably needs a little bit more thought on our end. And I would also just say, having sat at the planning board, I struggled with this because I, for one, look at this and say, oh my gosh, we are like telling everyone what to put everywhere, and this is
Right.
just killing me inside internally. But on the other side of it, having sat in the planning board, you know that developers will roll in with the absolute bare minimum for the absolute lowest cost they can find. And some, not all of them, some. And you as a planning board member are sitting there left wondering, what is it I can enforce? What can I request? What is our bare minimum threshold? So I totally get it from both sides here. So I'd like to find that nice compromise where the planning board feels that they have some flexibility and our owners in the community have some flexibility, But
Yeah, we've even had an applicant that had the opposite. They didn't know what they were submitting, and it was a beautiful landscape plan. And then when they got ready to install it, like, oh, what did I agree to? So that even has happened. So just trying to kind of create a fair.
I'll give you a great example of this, which is right now where, according to this language, we would, like you said, we would require foundation plantings all the way around a building. What if you had a beautiful natural view? Are you going to start blocking some of your view of this beautiful vista that might be outside of your windows? Like, are we?
No, oh, for commercial?
Yeah, are we? I know.
Now, it wouldn't apply if you didn't have pavement back there. You wouldn't have to do it.
What I'm
If you
saying
had
is,
them.
though,
Yeah.
there's some areas of town where
Sure.
you might be able to catch a really good view from an industrial park with a parking lot there. And are we now putting in these street trees and parking lot trees and actually not like blocking a good view? And that's why every situation is just a little bit different. But,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could look at it, you could even look at requiring, right now, we don't have a cohesive set of standards, so they don't work together. And that's really, I think, staff's desire is just have this set of standards
Main
so we can
objective,
at least, it goes together and we can explain to somebody what it means. But it doesn't have to be as prescriptive as this. There can definitely be some flexibility in there, so.
Yeah, and like I said, having sat on the planning board, I completely understand the desire for, this is going to be baseline and you better not bring us anything that doesn't even
Yeah, at
meet
least.
that.
Right.
And at the same time, you read all of this and you'd be like, oh my gosh, it's a lot of plantings to tell somebody they have to go do.
Sure.
So
Would it
I
be
see
helpful
from-
to have maybe some examples to look at? Maybe for the next go round, like this is a light industrial site, so let's look at this. Do you really want to do all these things?
Sure.
This is a commercial site, this is a multifamily site.
Yeah, that brings me back to something that I thought of while you were speaking too, which was, I don't know that I should assume I know exactly what some of these building sites look like. And so when you say light industrial, I may have an example. I can think of one or two that, I have been to and I'm trying to think, what is their landscaping? But I shouldn't assume that I know exactly what fits into each zone in each category. So some examples would be super helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be really a good, realistic way to look at it too. Yeah. To understand.
Anything from Liam here?
Not specific to that. I think my only question or concern is if the committee doesn't reorganize itself until January, and there is some urgency or need.
Sure.
If this is intended to either, make it more efficient or simplistic or understandable, it really doesn't put it on a path for implementation until February or March realistically, once you bring it out of committee to council for 2 readings and a public hearing. So I understand that the last subject, certainly very complicated. There doesn't seem to be any real urgency or desire from anyone in the community that we know about to bring on that type of funding mechanism. I was just asking a question as to whether this was different.
Sure.
So that was the only.
I liked your idea about just the plant list, if we could move that
You
forward.
just want to put the plant list forward?
Just to do
That's fine with me.
Yep.
the revised plant list, and that would at least, like, number 16. And then the standards for the sizes of those, that would be great.
So let's call those.
Sure, so I would be comfortable moving that portion forward. And then, you would have that as a tool, sooner, with the understanding that when you go back to examine the ordinance in total, that if the reorganized ordinance committee wanted to go back into that piece and make tweaks, at least in the interim, you would have that as a tool for planning board. I think that's a really good compromise.
That'd be great.
I'll entertain a motion for the plant list and was it the size? I'm sorry.
It's the approved plant list and the minimum sizes. So it's number 16 in the draft,
16 in the draft
All of
version?
section 16.
all of section 16.
Okay.
Okay,
So a motion to advance all of section 16 to the town council.
second?
Any further discussion? All in favor? Sure that is unanimous. And then the rest of this we'll be waiting for our next ordinance committee meeting. And in the meantime, we will do a little homework.
Yes.
Fair enough?
Sounds great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're out of hot topics. We have next agenda items, which we will leave, I think, for discussion to the next next committee chair, and to pick up the pieces with Liam and Autumn
Right,
here.
knowing
She's-
that we have short-term rentals, this,
There's that CPACE thing that may or may not
CPACE.
come back. There was another one.
Food trucks?
Was it food truck?
Food trucks needs to have a discussion, short-term rentals.
food trucks. How about, where are we with marijuana
I was gonna say
licensing?
it was marijuana creeping back around the corner on deadlines.
Cannabis,
will
sorry,
come
yeah,
back.
cannabis.
Also, there may be some desire to, I think there's at least a few other topics that I think got dropped that we need to pick up. But
I have a list.
Yeah.
I guess I'd ask Councilor Seiler if you want to, on the subject of short-term rentals, if you want to put a plug in for our.
Yes, absolutely. Recently decided, as of 3:45 this afternoon, not even 3:55 this afternoon, we decided that we are going to host our fourth quarterly Counselor Corner Live on the subject of short-term rentals, and that will be scheduled for Thursday, November 2nd at 6 o'clock.
Excellent use of that.
Thank you, Liam.
Any other comments before we adjourn?
Will you have a meeting in December?
That would likely be up to the next committee.
Okay.
Yeah, I think based off of scheduling and their, to be determined.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
I'll second it. All in favor? Thank you. That is unanimous. Have a good night, everyone.